Good afternoon, and we are back in the pastor study again. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as an overcomer? Do you see yourself perhaps as a victim? Many of us find ourselves with a foot in both camps from time to time. That's not all that unusual. Um, when life treats us in difficult ways, it's easy for us to succumb to that. Perhaps in your life you have experienced what some people might call raw evil. You've seen a homicide take place, maybe it was even a family member. Or perhaps you've been in the aftermath or come upon the immediate aftermath of a automobile accident that took somebody's life. Perhaps you've seen a child lying broken on the streets. Those things can be very, very difficult to overcome. Other issues of life that may impact our lives, financial reversals, losing our jobs, divorces. The world is full of things that can pull us down. Many of us don't stop to think that in Romans chapter 8, Paul writes to the Romans who are living in the very heart of the upcoming revival of persecution for believers, because they're living in Rome. It won't be too long before they're literally thrown out of Rome, those who survive. But he writes, we are more than conquerors through him who loves us in Jesus Christ. That is Jesus Christ. To the Galatians, he's writing in Galatians chapter 4, and he's explaining salvation to them. And then he comes to the point in verse 7 where he says, so you are now no longer a slave. You are God's child. And he will give you the blessings he has promised because you are his child. Not because you deserve it. Not because he feels sorry because of what's happened in your past. But because you're his child. Perhaps you've heard people, maybe even utter these words yourself. If only. And the list is endless. If only my parents had lived longer. If only my parents had left me an inheritance. If only I had made better grades. If only I had been a better football player. If only I hadn't had gotten a divorce. And the list goes on and on and on. Sometimes we find ourselves living in the land of if only. We look backwards and we say, if only this hadn't happened, my life would have been different. Perhaps so, but the reality is we don't know how different it would have been. We know the enemy is out to destroy us. James says, Peter says he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may destroy. So if he'd missed you with that dart, he certainly would have found you with another one. No surprise there. Max Lucado makes a statement. He says, many of us find ourselves in the convalescent home of the heart. That is, we go on and we live life in other ways. We maybe stay in good health. Perhaps we succeed in business. Perhaps we excel in academics. But we never address the heart issues. We never address the issues, the what ifs, the if onlys that hold us back. Paul writes to the Galatians, he says, you are no longer slaves. Now, perhaps in their mind, they're thinking, but we were never slaves. We're from Galatia. We're not slaves. The reality is sometimes we're slaves to our emotions. Sometimes we're slaves to our past. Sometimes we are slaves to the fact that we just can't get past some of the things that have happened to us. And yet the blessings of God are before us. And that's what we're promised as sons and daughters of the living God. It's hard. It is incredibly difficult. And yes, sometimes we need to seek out the advice of godly counselors. Sometimes they need to help us through difficult times. Sometimes we need to go to Jehovah Rapha, the God who heals. That's not just broken legs and colds and headaches. He's the God who heals cancer. He's the God who heals the unhealable. And he heals our emotions as well. You see, that's one of the blessings we receive as sons and daughters of the living God. That's why Paul can say we are more than conquerors, because we don't have to depend upon our weapons alone. We don't have to depend upon our skill or our ability or how well we can lift ourselves up by our bootstraps. We are more than conquerors because we are children of the King. And as such, we inherit the blessings of the King. We are joint heirs with Jesus. Everything he inherited from the Father, we have access to. So the next time you find yourself saying, if only, it's time to think, no, it's not if only. It's because I am a child of the King and I have access to the blessings and the gifts, the talents, and the weapons that the King has available to me. And that's everything he has in his heavenly storehouse. With that thought, I look forward to seeing you next week back in the Pastor Study.